If you are experiencing foundation issues, get a free estimate from Ox Foundations.
All of us in the community and a lot of people in Alabama lost a real good friend last week with the passing of David Foote. I know they did the celebration of life, and you were plugged into that. You knew David Foote a long time.
Well, I guess I met David probably when he turned 16. And showed up at the Frosty Inn, and that's a lot of folks hung out up there. And of course, and I'll tell this right off the bat that David was a good friend, but he was also a co-conspirator. He and I did a lot of things together. When I first came back here in the late 70s. I was working at a radio station at that time, and I went by to see David talk advertising. Well, the first thing David says is, we need you in the JCs. So that kind of started it all. And boy, what a great group of JCs we had in those days. I don't know, 30, 35 folks, and we were into everything. We sold Christmas trees to buy Christmas for kids that weren't going to have much of a Christmas otherwise. And I was telling somebody the story of they were saying, what do you remember about David? And one of them I won't tell. But the other one that I remember is we had delivered Christmas to a family that obviously was not going to have a Christmas if we hadn't brought it. And I happened to look, David was in the back of the Foote Brothers truck helping to hand out the stuff, and that we were carrying into the folks' house and putting around the Christmas tree, because we would do that right before Christmas. And David was standing in the back of the truck watching that, and I didn't see a tear, but I saw a glisten come over his eyes, and I know, that tells you what kind of a person David was. But
those of you who may not know, David Foote was a longtime business owner here in Sylacauga. His family is entrenched in Sylacauga. Really civic-minded, helped so many people, and a lot of that you're talking about is behind the scenes. Behind the scenes, not a.
Now we were involved in a lot of things that were, and I say we because there was a cadre of people back then. Civic activity was so important to people in our town that we had great civic clubs, whether it was the Lions or the Exchange or Rotary, still here, the Kiwanis Club, still here. And I think I can't not mention Civitan, although we didn't have a Civitan club back then. But so civic-minded, so involved in everything in the community, from the Christmas parade to Crazy Days. Crazy Days, as you will remember, were pretty crazy.
Oh yeah.
And those were good days. We would have the Christmas tree sold. We always had a haunted house on Halloween, and all that money that the JCs raised, as well as the other civic clubs, went back into the community. It went into valuable things that made Sylacauga what it was. Did you know, Jimmy, that we had a whole bunch of state JC presidents out of Sylacauga? I can't remember. I believe it was 4. And for a town our size to have that is just, it may have been 5. But to have that was just a unique thing among cities. And Sylacauga was regarded, and I'm going to use the JCs as an example because that's the civic club that David and I were involved in. Our nose was in everything, and we were known statewide for the efforts that we made. And a lot of that goes to leadership from people like David Foote.
He's a big Auburn fan.
Big Auburn fan. I will tell this story not necessarily on David, but on Ron Webster. I'm sure if you've been around here very, very long, you know Ron from Childersburg, been in the banking business, retired now. Didn't know it, but he had had a heart attack. I noticed he had lost a lot of weight. But anyway, I went off and left an Alabama Huggy at Foote's. When I got it back, Ron had taken and bitten the Alabama A out of it. Yeah, we had a big time with Auburn and Alabama. Big Auburn fan. David loved Auburn. Had a lot of family connections.
And very supportive of Auburn University.
Very supportive of Auburn University. The thing that a lot of people don't realize about David is the number of people he personally helped behind the scenes. The celebration of life was so well attended. People came from, I know Bob Smith, I bumped into Bob. He and Bill was my class. Bob was class of 66. And Bob came from Pennsylvania down here for the celebration. I saw my friend Byron Morris, who came over. He's retired. Byron was building technology guy, graduated from Auburn, and he came over from North Georgia. He said he wouldn't have missed it for the world. A lot of people locally, a lot of people from throughout the area, and that was because David never met a person that couldn't be his friend. I honestly believe that. He knew people from all walks of life, had great stories. He's already missed. David had a debilitating disease that we all knew would eventually take his life. And fortunately, and the family would say this, fortunately it took his life without a long, it was long enough, but without it dragging on for decades.
He was, and I didn't know this, but it was mentioned to me that he was one of the first to wear shoes without socks.
Yeah, and I'll tell you who preceded him, our former district attorney, Robert Rumsey. I will never forget, and I was telling Robert not long ago that I remember I could picture it like it was yesterday. And David was the same way, but wearing a long sleeve dress shirt, a pair of navy Bermuda shorts, and penny loafers or tassel loafers with no socks. And that was that became a style. Yeah. And a lot of us did that. Ruined our shoes, of course, but what the heck.
Somebody was telling me the story not long ago that they had purchased furniture, and it's fine furniture that Foote Brothers had. They purchased some furniture, and I forgot, something wasn't quite right after they got the furniture. They called David. David said, "We'll come get it, and we'll put other furniture in there." And he did.
Yeah, and he trained all of his delivery guys in furniture repair. And I'm going to tell you, they could do stuff. We had an ottoman that somebody sat on the corner of the ottoman and cracked the caster, and it was wobbly and loose. Hey, they came and got it and fixed it. They didn't, it was obviously wasn't their fault, but because he didn't want a piece of furniture out there that looked new and didn't act new, he came and got it and he fixed it.
Those girls that worked in, they loved him.
Oh yeah. I don't recall. Now, I think David struggled a little bit as he began to have some symptoms of his illness, but I don't recall him ever being ugly with someone. I mean, and the opportunities, I'm sure, arose because if you're around people, you're going to have those opportunities. But I do not recall David ever. I never saw him be anything but courteous and nice to everyone he dealt with. I said earlier, we were co-conspirators, and we were always up for a good time. We decided we'd have a one-time party that ended up we were going to have one in the summer, And then that was going to be it. There were 11 more of those after that. We had to have it twice a year. It lasted about 5 or 6 years. And then David and I went in one day and said, David, we need to have a reunion, Frosty Inn reunion. It was a one-time event. This will be the 10th one, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of memories of David passed around, because David enjoyed good people and good times.
There's a gentleman that has same name as you in business here in Sylacauga.
Yeah,
and they were really,
the ugly Jim Green.
He was really tight, and he came by the funeral home, and he was going to be out of town for a wedding or something, and he wanted to sign the book, and you could tell, there was just a connection there. And that's how David was. If you knew David Foote and you connected with him, you connected for life.
It's a funny thing. I've known a lot of people, and a lot of people I've known have passed away, as we all will, one day. But I don't know that those people, David, as I said, had a long and debilitating illness. And I don't know that a week went by, a few days even went by, that I didn't think about my friend. And I think if you talk to anybody, I know when I would bump into, my mother had the same disease, or of the same type that David had. And I went through that with her. And I saw David one time several years ago, and he was still himself. And I wanted to remember him that way, so I would not go see him. But he had plenty of friends that did. I always asked them, what's the story, what's the latest? And I would never bump into one of our mutual friends without asking, have you seen David? How is he doing? And that's the way people felt about David.
That celebration of life went from First Methodist Church and over here to the restaurant. You couldn't stir with a stick. If you got in there, you couldn't leave.
That's pretty much true, and it was my pleasure to, somebody needed to have a PA system, and I decided it would be me.
One, right?
Yeah, and so in the years that have passed, I've maintained it's not a very expensive PA, but you never know when you'll need to use it. And since I still do a little radio, I still have access to all my old music, and that's what we old people want to hear. I wondered why Mom and Daddy listened to all that 1920s and 30s stuff, and now I know we listen to that 1950s and 60s and 70s stuff. So that's the way they want it.
A lot of stories shared there,
Oh yeah, yeah. What a beautiful service it was, from the opening with the piper, bagpipes, with Amazing Grace leading the family into the beautiful First Methodist Church, and all the way through Reverend Lee, who was David's pastor at Wesley Chapel, talked about his value to the church. Some beautiful singing by John Floyd's daughter. I wish I had brought the little program with me, and I could share the names. Of course, I didn't bring my glasses, so I might not have could.
David's really. You mentioned church. He's really supportive of his church.
He was extremely. He was a member of. I think they were members of First Methodist when they came here. And then as the children came along, David had two, and great kids, great, well, as you would expect, being David and Karen's. But as David wanted his children to grow up in a church, and he wanted it to be a small, family-friendly church, as Wesley Chapel definitely is. But the celebration of life, Billy Fields, who is an instructor, I'm not sure if he's a professor or not, but at the University of Alabama, Billy is Bill Fields or William Fields. I'm not sure what he goes by these days, but he gave a eulogy that was just excellent. A lot of fun, not a lot of sadness involved. A lot of chuckles about David, and It was what it should have been. Mm-hmm. We all celebrated, and we did celebrate. If David could have had a big party of all his friends, first we would have had to have it in, I've forgotten, Joel Eves Coliseum, I guess it is, down in Auburn. We'd have had to have it in there. He wouldn't have had it in Memorial Coliseum in Tuscaloosa for nothing. But he would have had friends that came over from Tuscaloosa. But if his closest friends could have been there, they were there on Saturday night, and it was it was fitting. I don't know that maybe every town has one of those in every generation. I know of some. There've been some great leaders that have come through here, great behind the scenes leaders, and David Foote of our generation is maybe that great leader.
And finally, this morning, Jim, nobody wanted to leave the moment.
No. I think it broke up as it needed to with a bunch of 50, 60, and 70 and 80-year-old folks. We needed to get home. The sun had been down a couple hours, and we needed to get home and get to bed. But it was as it should have been, and would have been as you expected it to be. And you can't ask for more than that.
That's right. We honored David Foote this morning, not just today, but he was a good guy who will really be missed. And Jim, we appreciate you sharing this morning.
I am tickled to death.